podcast, we are discussing a very interesting topic: corporate culture, employee brand management, and of course, employee happiness. And today, with us, the great expert, Olga Aristova. With Olga, we will talk about LATAM region and about employee happiness in LATAM and especially in Mexico. Hi, Olga.
Hi, Tatiana. Very nice to see you again.
Olga, as usual, in the beginning, I will ask all my guests. I ask all my guests to introduce themselves because our audience have to know the heroes of our podcast. And I think, what if you do it by yourself? You could say the most important things from your biography. We know each other for more years, but I think you know yourself better. So please, could you introduce yourself?
Of course, my pleasure. So my name is Olga Aristova. I'm from Russia, but for the last 5 years, almost 6 now, I've been living in Mexico. I have more than 17 years of experience working in HR. It happens so the most of my experience, I've been working in Swedish companies. I spent 10 years at IKEA in Russia. And then I worked for a direct sales company, Oriflame, which also is of Swedish origin. About 10 years ago, I made my MBA in Spain, in Barcelona, in ESADE Business School. And after that, I returned to Russia to work for Oriflame. And in about 3.5 years, I was offered this opportunity to work in Latin America. I never, let's say, dreamed of it. It was never my ambition goal. But right now, looking back, I'm very happy I accepted the offer. Currently, I'm working in a totally new industry for me. It's the industry of entertainment. It's music industry. It's a company called 1RPM that is dealing with distribution of music and promotion of artists. That's why I have this soundproof wall behind me, because all the rooms here are soundproof because we work with music a lot. So yeah, I'm very happy to be working in entertainment now. A lot of learnings.
It's really great. Now we are living in LATAM, and previously I worked for a Swedish company. Yesterday I saw a film. It was a film from Finland, and I understood that it's very absolutely difficult type of culture in Finland, and the culture, for example, in Brazil, and I think also in Mexico. So, what was your experience the first time after the years in the European, especially in the Scandinavian companies, when you first time came to LATAM and start to work with colleagues from the different Latin American countries?
So for me, I think it was a smooth transition because I transferred within the same company. So I was familiar with, the corporate culture was the same, business model, business processes, and everything. So it was, not a complete shock in a way, but of course, certain things are different. And I would say if we take Swedish culture, and the differences with LATAM or in general, or particularly with Mexico, that is more obvious for me. I would say that Scandinavian or Swedish culture is very democratic, non-hierarchical, while I think that is common in Russian culture and also here in Mexico and LATAM, that as per also culture differences framework by Hofstadter, we are very, let's say, collectivistic, but also we are very hierarchical, while Sweden is individualistic and non-hierarchical. Also, in Hofstadter model, there is a parameter of how masculine or feminine is the culture. Has nothing to do with the gender. It's just certain, let's say, soft skills. So Russia and Latin Mexico is a lot on the masculine side, while Sweden is more on the feminine side. So I think it's a general, sometimes difficult for local people when they're first introduced to the culture to, let's say, to accept the culture of open doors, to access freely those that are more senior, either in hierarchy or the age, to share openly their opinion. So, and for me, I think the most challenging and not so obvious at the beginning was certain communication styles. Let's say, again, if we talk about Sweden, it's more about, or let's say Northern Europe, Scandinavian countries, it's the communication styles are more direct and assertive, while here it's not so common and it might be even perceived rude. So I think in terms of giving feedback, I did not realize, even though I asked especially my team to give me the feedback if I'm doing something wrong in terms of cultural aspects, because they are the only source of information for me, let's say. But exactly because giving, let's say, constructive feedback, it's not so common and socially acceptable. They couldn't give me the feedback even though I asked them. And I was doing certainly certain mistakes, especially when giving feedback myself. So after some time, I realized, and then I tried to adjust. I think I'm still learning that. But yeah, I think for me, that personally, that was, and maybe still is the biggest challenge here.
Mm-hmm. What is interesting about the European and Latin American culture? They are people-oriented, but a different way.
Yeah.
What if you talk about the difference and the common from a people-oriented culture? What could you talk about culture in Mexico? What is
I would say if we
in
talk
Latin America? What is the special aspects we talk about the people-centric culture?
I think we sort of started to talk about it. If you talk about this people-centric culture, of course, at core, wherever we are, be it in Asia, Africa, Europe, or Latin America, I think core principles would be the same. But you need to adjust your strategies or your tactics or your approaches to local culture. For example, let's say if we talk about diversity and inclusion, which is very crucial for people-centric cultures, I think it's very culturally sensitive. Not in all cultures you can talk freely and openly about certain diversity matters. When it comes, let's say, to Latin America or to Mexico in specific, just as I mentioned, that communication style should be adjusted. Let's say if you are direct and assertive, you should adjust it more to be, let's say, more friendly, polite, finding ways to explain yourself so that you're understood, but you're not perceived as a person. I think we had an interesting evidence when we were comparing the average handling time of a call in the call centers when I worked back in Oriflame between CIS and Latin America region. The structure of the call was the same. It's the greeting, asking question to understand the problem, offering the solution, and then wrapping up the call. And I think at the beginning, when we analyzed the difference in length was like 3 or 4 times, because in Latin America, you sort of, it's not that you talk more, but you spend a little bit more time to establish these relations, to speak politely and express your concern about the problems that a customer is facing, etc. And in the end, we did optimize certain things, but we sort of had an agreement in the management team that we will never strive to, meet the same length of the time just because of those cultural differences. Then another thing that is also interesting for in Mexico, I'm pretty sure in Brazil it should be the same. Family is very important, and families are big, and there are a lot of traditions. And for example, when I was back in Europe, we were doing some after-work activities, and they were very well accepted. People would stay longer hours to mingle together, to hang out together, to spend some time together, connect, network, etc. And when I came here and I tried to introduce certain initiatives like that, very rarely people wanted to stay longer because they all had some family arrangements, activities, and it was interfering their family life, and they were not ready to prioritize that. That was, that was a learning for me. So we were finding, let's say, compromises with management so that certain things we can do during the working hours. And another, and it's not from my example, but it's an example from someone else in the HR community here, that in one manufacturing side, I think they had problems with labor safety, security, people following the rules to be, more safe. And there were multiple trainings and communication. And one of the things that really worked and made the difference is then when the communication was sort of directed towards the family. So people were told, if you follow the rules, then you will have, let's say, less risk to be injured and more time to provide for your family. You'll be safe and sound so that, you have a happy family life, etc. And because your close ones concerned about you, so it would be good that you follow the rules and security instructions, etc. And that made a difference when communication was addressed, let's say, towards the family values.
Mm-hmm. Now I know that everywhere in the world, well-being topics is very, very important. And people start to talk about stress management, preventing burnout, and also about care and about employees. But for different countries, for different cultures, we could say that absolutely different approach. If we talk about Mexico, if we talk about the companies in which you worked or is working now, or maybe other companies that you know in this country, what is the important topic of well-being you could see from the HR perspective?
I think it's becoming more and more important. At the same time, I think certain things are still, like, including myself, coming from Russia and here in Latin America, I feel like we are not very well educated. There are still certain beliefs and taboos that, getting mental health support is kind of, it may be about you being weak. You should be able to solve this issues by yourself, and going to a mental health support specialist is like the last resort, etc. And right now, I think it's even more crucial for me in the company where I work, because in general, music industry or entertainment industry has its toll when it comes to well-being. Because first of all, let's say it's a lot of creative people that create, and they are very sensible about how their content and songs and music is perceived by the audience. Then if you take hours, they are like very different. It's mostly weekends and evenings when you go, I don't know, to clubs to look for new artists, and when you go to festivals to promote your artists. In general, I think it's not for nothing that music industry, or in general entertainment industry, is also familiar with such problems as alcoholism and drugs, etc., because there is a lot of pressure. It's not only about their accessibility and maybe large incomes, but I think it's also driven by this mental health issues. And there is more and more awareness about this in the industry. Also, this industry, in terms of diversity, let's say, quite man-populated, especially if we take production. One of the recent statistics that I saw, in production, I think only 2% are female workers and 98 are men. Not in all the sides of the music industry. And if you take my company, we are actually quite good in terms of the gender balance. But it is quite tough industry to work with in terms of mental health. So I think, and it became even more, I think, important during the pandemic. When we were in lockdown. So I would say maybe in Mexico, just as well as Russia, we are just on the way to talk more about it, more freely, more openly. For example, I found, thanks to my colleagues, one specialist here in Mexico that is specializing on the mental health in music industry. So I am planning certain activities and webinars with her, so that we can have a little bit more awareness about how we can, first of all, support ourselves, because like on the plane, first you get mask on yourself, and then how can we support our artists when we work with them. So yeah, mental health and well-being is very, very important and crucial. I think it's also generational. differences. It's not only cultural differences, but I think younger generations are more prone to it, more looking for it. But we, as a let's say elder generation, need to learn, including from them, how to speak about this and how to address those things.
If we talk about life-work balance or life-work integration, a new conception of the people well-being. I know what in Latin America we have a lot of opportunities for holidays, for spend time with music, for have a lot of free time which we like to spend, as you said, with families. What is about corporate events? Firstly, you mentioned what you prefer to do it during work days and working hours. But what type of events they usually you pay attention? For example, now in Brazil, we are in the São João holidays is coming. This is,
yes,
say this is the second carnival for Brazil, and then never before I moved to Brazil, I did understand that carnival is not only for tourists. This is a very, very important part of culture. It's very important for all people in Brazil. And also with São João is the same. So when we talk about the main reasons in which you have to work as HR, what type of holidays and what is the tradition? Maybe people prefer to do it for this company, outside the company, I prefer for every day. So you have some traditions. What do you talk about it?
Let me first give you a little bit of a context. When I was, doing my research before accepting the offer to come to Mexico, one of the statistics that I found that Mexico is among the countries, or like among top countries with the longest like working hours and hard working. And I was like, I always sort of thought that that's Japan that is famous for like very dedicated, committed, long working hours culture. But when I came, I realized that it's not only about the personal culture, but it's actually also about the legislation. So when I came 5 years ago, the number of vacation days granted by the state was 6 days per year, just 6 days. Number of sort of mandatory public holidays, again, if you compare across Latin America, I think we had the fewest. Each time I would make list of holidays, let's say Mexico, Colombia, Chile, other countries, I think Mexico has had the shortest list. Another thing is that in Mexico, by law, it's still 48 hours working week. So it's 6 days working week. In fact, I would say that most of the white collars are working 5 days a week, but it's the blue collars, manufacturing, warehouse, call centers, and others, they work 6 days a week. And so around the same time when I came to Mexico, there was a new government, new president, and new government who stepped in place, and they are doing some reforms that also meant to support employees in terms of that. So now vacations, for example, since last year, they doubled, but it's still just 12 days. And I'm saying just because I'm coming from the culture when it's like at least 4 weeks that you have during the year. While for some people and colleagues, it's like, okay, it's a lot. They don't even have enough like ideas how to spend it. And I had some, examples when I would talk to people like, you need to go to holidays. You have a lot of holidays. Like, well, no, I prefer to work. I don't want to go on holidays, which for me is, let's say, surprising. I always use all of my vacation days. Now, also, when it comes to the length of the working week, we anticipate that this change might come, that it will be downsized from 48 to 40. And then, of course, this kind of changes, even though they are meant for the better, maybe the way these initiatives and reforms are executed are not in the best way, because I have talked to some people like entrepreneurs, small and middle-sized business that were hit hard financially by these reforms because and the more reforms are coming. So I think it's not sort of black and white that it's good, because if a company cannot survive because now by law they have to pay just much more money of these changes, they might not survive, so people will lose the job. And so this is just to give a context that actually, and for me, what is most surprising, that, for example, in schools, there are much more holidays than are public mandatory holidays for the general society. So it's, again, it's a big family issue. Okay, what do you do with your kid when he or she doesn't go to school because there is a holiday, but you have already maybe used all of your vacation days? And I think that is not very well balanced in terms of the legislation, certain practices and tradition. And that is why still women are not very well represented in general in the workforce, but especially like in the higher levels. But there is a hope, because since a few days ago, the first female president of Mexico was elected. She comes into power in October. So let's see if there are going to be any changes. And in general, I see when it comes to elections in different parts of Mexico, I see more and more female faces that are stepping in to govern the country and parts of the country. So in terms of holidays and traditions, I would say also depends on different parts of the Mexico, because Mexico is big and diverse, not as big as Brazil, but still it's a very big country. So let's say one of the holidays that is most famous outside of Mexico is Day of the Dead. Those of you who have seen Coco by Disney knows what we're talking about, and it's very big here in Mexico City. But for example, if you take Guadalajara, that is more traditional, religious, for them, Easter would be a much more important holiday, and Day of the Dead they almost don't celebrate. I mean, right now, the company where we work in is based in just Mexico City. So we were doing the Halloween and Day of the Dead celebration because they are around the same days. And then actually going back to work and life balance, in the company worldwide, I guess it's also specifics of the music and entertainment industry. We have company-wide sort of holidays around Christmas, holiday break around Christmas and New Year's, which is 2 weeks almost in all the countries. And it's because not much things are happening, like all the launches are happening, let's say, during December, but then it's sort of a slowdown, and we can afford, of course, not all the, let's say, employees, certain employees that are responsible for maintaining that our digital tools are working for our artists. They, of course, do not have that long of a break, or maybe in countries where they do not celebrate Christmas that much, they don't enjoy the same break. But I think in Mexico, it's a really good addition, since we do have very little vacation days granted by the state.
It's very interesting what when we talk about different countries. Here is Latin America, we have different traditions, but we have a lot of the same situation. For example, the schools, we have the same situation here. And it's, for example, for business, it's not so convenient. It's much more convenient for people who work for the government companies and structures. If we talk about genders and about the culture, I remember what we discussed that in Mexico, we're mostly masculine-oriented culture. Usually when we talk about masculine-oriented cultures, we understand what, as you said, it's difficult to discuss the mental health issues, for example. Sometimes it's maybe the high stress. Sometimes maybe it's not, that could be a problem in communications, because in men's communications, especially when we talk with men, it could be a little bit hard. What do you think from the people-centered culture and the perspective? how the masculine culture influence on the current situation, and also from the men's and from a man and from a women perspective. What could be the problems? What changes could you see now? But as you said, you really had the first woman as a president. And what changes do you see? And how the companies maybe try to help the employees, especially the women, how to work in this type of culture, how to handle their responsibilities. Because then we will talk about the cultures. Then the masculine culture dominated, and the family is very important. It means, firstly, this is about women's responsibilities. So, could you tell a bit how companies look at this? Maybe they have some programs. Maybe they also inside companies start to talk about changing of the culture. Or not, or they prefer to say the tradition of masculine culture and just make a little additional issues, for example, for mental health or for preventing burnout.
I think it's a very good question. I even haven't thought about it from this perspective. I would say, first of all, just as I mentioned, music industry or entertainment industry is very also male driven, and including especially in certain parts of it. And just this, and for example, here it's very visible. I think in Brazil, most probably it's the same, that 8th of March is very different from Russia, where we sort of celebrate women giving flowers, etc. It's not that much of a feministic holiday, but here 8th of March, if you you cannot use even word celebrate, because it's not about celebrating. It's about recognizing your rights. It's fighting for your rights. There are every year there are big demonstrations in Mexico. Also, they're addressing the topic of violence, including domestic violence against women. And then, so this year on the 8th of March, we were invited. All of the women of our office were invited to an event organized by Spotify. And Spotify, of course, is a major player in the entertainment industry. They call themselves audio industry because it's not only music, but also podcasts. And they collected in one place, I think around 600 women that were musicians or like us working in the management of the music industry, and bloggers and composers, you name it. And I think we are just starting, but the importance is to talk about it, to be more aware and to see that you are not alone in your struggles. And it was so powerful, certain panel discussions that we had there in this event. It was very educative, including for me. And let's say we were very inspired. And for me, it was very also important and felt very inclusive that Spotify not only invited, let's say, our frontline ladies from sales department or from marketing that is doing artist marketing, but they invited everyone. I went there, our legal team went there, our office management went there. And I think that was, let's say, the highlight for me, how it can be not solved. You cannot solve this kind of things with one event. But it's about unity and consistency. I think Spotify made it, it was their second event that they were doing, second year they were doing it here in Mexico. And it's a lot about feeling empowered when you attend, when you hear the stories of others, be it in the corporate world or be it the artists out there in the stage. Because again, if you talk about family life, I mean, one of the artists and musicians, she's a mom of a newly born child, and she was sharing her stories of how the industry that she doesn't want to live, that's her life, that's her inspiration, that's her energy, but also she wants to spend more time with the newborn kid, and how it's hard for her to combine those things, and how she's adjusting, and how she and her team are trying to, make it possible for her and for her kid to follow this life. In terms of certain things that companies are doing, I think I haven't seen in the companies where I worked. And here, for example, our population is very young. We have only 2 mothers. But for example, the length of the maternity leave, because I think in many countries in Latin America is just 3 months. I know that in Colombia it's 4 months. In Chile, I think it's about 6 months, the maternity leave. I don't know how long it is in Brazil, but some companies offer additional time for maternity leaves. They do, for example, some of them, I don't think it's yet very common, and mostly coming from international companies that have such programs outside of LATAM, is also supporting fathers' paternity leave. But I haven't seen that yet as a very common thing. What companies, let's say, have to do is that we have to have rooms for lactation, so that mothers can feed their kids. That is, let's say, stipulated by law. So yeah, I'm thinking about this gender specific, about masculine culture and people centricity. I think this is something I need to explore more. And an interesting comment I mentioned earlier, that one of the colleagues advised me, this specialist, the mental health specialist that is focused exactly on the music industry, and it was male colleague who recommended her to me. So for me, that was also, a sign of a certain, let's say, openness, that I know this person, and also, let's say, maturity. I don't know, and I don't want to ask if they work together, etc. But if you know these people, that already gives me, let's say, a lot of hope that we are, to a certain extent, advanced on this matter. And for me, it also, because the industry is new for me, and I wouldn't know what are the most common problems and how can we mitigate and address those risks and problems. So for me, it's also the sign that I can rely on help of such professional that is in Mexico, that knows the industry and is familiar with the challenges that come with the, let's say, disadvantages, and there are certain disadvantages of the industry.
For me, it was one of a surprising fact. What Mexico is one of the youngest country in the world.
Okay.
So for example, I know some countries who is really very young, but mostly this is the Muslim countries. In Muslim countries, we have a lot of people with 3-4 kids per family, and also I see what Mexico is really young countries. And what is about cross-generational issues? As they talk about young generation and talk about previous generation, how could you describe the corporate policies in working with young generation? Maybe some specific could you see from this topic? And as about from educational issues for the young generation. Is it a problem for that? Not a problem. Companies have to invest for them because they don't have possibility to give the higher education, or what could you tell about it?
Let me start with education, because I think it's one of the challenges across LATAM, not in all the countries, but when it comes to Mexico, for example, by constitution, the education is available for everyone until very high level. But at the same time, yes, it is accessible, and it is accessible equally for both men and women, but the quality, it's not the best. And let's say there are universities that are government funded universities that do not require a lot of funds from the students to study, but they are very hard to get in. There is a lot of, let's say, competition. And then there are private universities. Some are good, but then they are expensive. So not everyone can afford to have that education. And there's certainly, that leads to skill gap. And I think one of the, let's say, most easiest evidence to show. I was doing my research on LATAM, and for example, there was a report by Education First or English First, another Swedish company, and they were providing a list of countries with, let's say, with the best English knowledge on average on the population and with the worst. And Mexico was on the bottom. And it might sound counterintuitive because we are so close to the United States, but that's actually why. Because of course, United States, like if you speak English, that you're easier for you, let's say, together you're like more motivated because still there is a big difference in incomes. And you will find more people speaking English on the coast side because that's driven by tourism. There are a lot of tourists that are coming from US and Canada. Therefore, people are more sort of incentivized and have more exposure to English speaking. And so if you have a vacancy or if you have a position that requires English, that will have, let's say, a markup and margin in terms of the salary, because it's just less people with such knowledge on the market. So there is more competition and you need to compete, or you need to invest in the English, in the language education inside the company. And then, of course, since this skill gap, it's not only about English. So every company should assess, let's say, what are the needs right now, and also what are the needs for the future, and what can we afford in terms of the budget? How do we prioritize those investments? And then, for example, again, I never looked into this, but I was amazed how many, well, there are quite many universities that have programs for music business, which is a great help for us. We work a lot with these universities. And it was also like one of the best universities here, and it's the best private university that is, let's say, expensive. It's called Tec de Monterrey. It's among the best ones in total Latin America. Not only they have specific programs for entertainment, music, audio industry, etc., but very early on they start working with the companies to help students to get the practical knowledge. I was in one of the, let's say, breakfasts for employers for from the entertainment industry in this university. And colleagues, I don't remember, it was one of these major companies. I think it was Warner, but I might be wrong. It's Warner, Universal, the ones who were launching Barbie. And last summer, for example, they involved students to brainstorm about launching of Barbie movie on Mexico market. And I think that's such a, I don't know, tasty project to have. I would never dream that a student can have access to this kind of projects. And then after they have those brainstorming ideas, those ideas that won and were taken to execution, the students were invited to participate in the execution of those projects. So I would say it's let's say it's rather uneven. Some universities are really good, doing a great job, but they are not available to everyone. So indeed, having, let's say, proper strategy and investments into education, it's inevitable in Mexico, but in many other countries of Latin America as well. I don't know what's your experience in Brazil so far.
When I talk about the young generation and graduate recruitment, I remember one in Europe, in Russia, of course, it's very, very popular topic. The people, companies invest a lot in working with young generation. This is a great example about the Barbie movie and adaptation for the market using the students be interested to help to try to something new. I could see, for example, here in Latin America, maybe it's not so hot topics, like, for example, the topics of diversity in terms of the gender, in LGBT, for example, or about race. So it's very important for Brazil, for example. There are a lot of topics which color of your skin, and this is very important for companies to work with different type of employees, different way. Maybe the generational topic is not so number one priority, but I see what companies start to work. And also they talk about, but another question about employer branding and employer brand management. Is it a topic for the labor market in Mexico? Or usually this is a topic when they have a shortage of some employees, when we understand what we need to attract the more talented people, or we need to retain them, or when we understand that we have a huge competition for the talents. I could see, but here in Brazil, I meet one of the biggest employer brand community. More than 20,000 people in the community who is talking about employer brand. What is about Mexico? What is about employer brand management? Maybe, but it's a priority. But I could see the topic of employer brand management. We have some specific here in Brazil. What is about Mexico?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question because I feel like there is not big of a community, maybe especially devoted to employer branding. Just a few weeks ago, I had a call with another quite big player on the Russian market that are looking into expanding into Latin America, and they were doing their research. We also talked about you being present in Brazil, and before we talked, they told me, like, our research shows like we are under impression that there is no big employer branding community, but we are not there. You are there in Mexico. Please tell us. And I felt like I said the same. I'm like, I didn't find. I mean, there are some conferences. There is HR association of HR directors that is doing a lot of events. But I haven't found the same community that, for example, I was part of in Russia, and I really enjoyed being part of that community, and I sort of miss it. And then I think a year ago we discussed this with you before when we had our conversation before Embras conference and award that wait, I lost the idea. What did I want to talk?
I don't see the same type of community.
I think the mistake that I made, that initially when I came to Mexico, I didn't know, like, maybe I would stay for 2 years, so I didn't feel maybe the need, or that was part of my migration journey. I wanted to preserve my identity and wasn't looking very much to me. I don't know. I certainly made certain mistakes in terms of developing the network locally, and then pandemic came. So I think when I sort of decided that I will stay for longer here, and now it's actually time to invest and establish the network, pandemic killed it all. The lockdown and a lot of events were online. So right now I'm looking into more, like, I'm going more often to events and conferences. But still I haven't come across a very strong employer branding community. And I'm asking myself, is it not needed? Or did I look, let's say, bad or not enough? Do I not know where to look? In general, Mexico, what is very strong is the power of associations in different communities. So if you want to enter the market, there are associations that are industry related, or associations that are functions related, like you would find industry for logistics, or you would find, associations for logistics or warehousing or HR director or marketing for every small direction. And then also geographical associations like American Chamber of Commerce or Swiss Chamber of Commerce or Swedish Embassy, also mingling Swedish companies. And for example, Oriflame, let's say legally they were a Swiss company, not a Swedish company, so we were part of Swiss Chamber of Commerce, and within the Chamber of Commerce they had different like committees. There was a HR committee, that's where you could talk with HR experts from the Swiss companies, but I haven't found one community that is specifically focused on employer branding, and I'm still looking.
for me, it's one of the specific of the Brazil community. It's very, very active. Here is very active HR community, and I know what yes. And it's very big. There are a lot of events, and I know all the cities, not all the cities, but I think 4 or 5 cities is very, very active in it. Olga, my last questions for you during our conversation. What is your 3 main tips which you could get to your colleagues from HR want to work, want to work in Mexico, or who have to work the employees in Mexico? What is 3 main tips?
I think if you're coming from outside Mexico to work here, especially if you're coming from outside of LATAM region, then of course, first to be culturally aware of specifics of the country. And we did talk about that last time, that I think the best book on the topic is The Culture Map by, I forgot the name, I have it here somewhere, by Erin Meyer. It's almost like my nightstand book. I always have it near. And, you know, since we started talking about books, I think there is one, like, I was so happy that you invited me to talk about happiness at work, because right now I'm reading a book that is called Hardwiring Happiness. I even have it here. It's by Rick Hansen. And it's about neuroplasticity, and it talks about how our brains are negativity biased by evolution. So if things are going good, that's not relevant for our brain to focus on. The brain always scans our surrounding for risks and bad things and how to not repeat bad things. Right now, I know in Brazil already came out the continuation of Inside Out movie. It's called here Intensamente. The for kids that talks about different emotions, and now it talks about puberty and new emotions like anxiety and boredom and shame. I think it's a terrific movie, and I think this Hardwiring Happiness box is also helping have quite practical tools and approaches how to rewire your brain so you can be more focused on the positive things. And even though this book is more for an individual, like how every individual, how every person can work with rewiring the brain and understand it better, how it all works, I think certain things you can also apply to companies. And it is about not only focusing on risk and things that are going bad, it's about celebrating wins, even if they are small wins. It's about the culture of recognition. It's about the culture of positive feedback, not only, you know, constructive feedback. And I think Gallup, that has this Gallup Strengths Finder survey, is also focusing on your strengths rather than focusing on your weaknesses, you know, an approach that I think we all followed for a long time. I think it's also very much about this people-centric and happiness, because it's so much easier to thrive on your strengths. And then as long as you can understand yourself better, to have this self-awareness, that would be a fundament to have a happier life at work or outside of work. And let's say be contagious to people around you, contagious them with this feeling of happiness and confidence and calm. So yeah, that would be my advice in terms of cultural awareness. Erin Meyer, the best book ever. And it's I can very relate because I am familiar with European, Russian, Swedish, now LATAM cultures. Brilliant book. And since your podcast is about happiness at work, I would really recommend also this book about hardwiring happiness. It's also very interesting.
Olga, thank you for this conversation. Thank you for entering our podcast.
Thank you, Tatiana, for inviting. Yeah, me too. Have a great day.
Thank you. This is podcast Happy at Work. Stay in touch.